Morning, everybody. Fantastic to see so many of you coming from many parts of the UK and outside the UK as well in some cases. Great, well, why don't we kick off then? So my name is Emily Sun, and I'm a co-director of Place Matters, and I really wanted to welcome everyone into this webinar. It's a very special webinar, as we have Dame Julia Cleverdon and David Sanderson as special guests engage in a kind of three-way fireside chat with the plants behind us, serving as a fireplace, to really talk about some of their learnings from a career-long experiences of place-based change. And just before we dive into that conversation, just to say a couple words about Place Matters. We are a partnership organization, and we're all about accelerating the impact of place-based change. And the way that we kind of loosely define place-based change, because there are many definitions, is really a way of bringing about change that's collaborative, cross-sector, and very importantly, with the community at the center of that change, working on things that really matter to that community in the places and the geographies that are meaningful to them. So it's really around that kind of place-based change we're talking about. There's probably no need with this audience to explain why it's such an important and urgent need for place-based change right now, with so many stats around child poverty, health inequality, life expectancy inequality, all those things not going in the right direction at this moment. But there's also a lot of energy and desire and passion within the communities to make a change, as well as the many services and organizations that work with them. So a great opportunity to bring about that change together. So with that, just wanted to then introduce Dame Julia and David. David here, you spent about 20 odd years in the army.
I was 24 years as a soldier.
4 years.
23 years almost with rank.
So yes, lovely sort of two pillars of your career. And with rank as a CEO over the past sort of 13 years, you have been really pioneering different ways of doing place-based change. You've also been pioneering a very relational approach to philanthropy, which we're going to hear a lot more about today. So really wonderful to have you here. And Dame Julia, so you've been really an activist and a change champion over many decades as well. You were chief executive of business in the community for about 17 years. You then worked with then Prince as a special advisor to his charities. And then you set up I Will, was chair of Teach First National Literacy Trust, not to name all the things that you were doing in those years. But now, very importantly for us, you're also chair of Place Matters and vice chair of Fair Education Alliance as well, amongst the many other things that you do. So wonderful to have you both. Thank you so much for making the time. So maybe it'd be good to start there, sort of starting from a personal angle, what it is that in your personal journey that brought you to place-based change, and what did you bring from that personal sort of career and your personal journey that really informed your approach to place-based change? And David, can we start with you?
Of course, I joined rank in 2002, and I think I was very conscious of being Lancashire of the Burnley riots, and the impact that had on a small community, and the potential impact on other communities across the UK. And I joined rank at a time when the chair wanted something different. He wanted somebody that was going to spend more time on the ground than my predecessor. So the idea of going out, getting a flavour for what was needed, kicking the tires was part of that. And I was conscious that even though as a soldier, I wasn't a great historian, but there were a couple of things that I think I brought from the military into those early years. One was about, it sounds rather grand, about one of the principles of war, about concentrating force in the context of the military, about concentrating your fighting power, your combat power, your logistic power, your intelligence in one place in order to bring about a decision. And I think the idea of going to Burnley was to spend time on the ground and then to spend time over a period of years investing in the local community, concentrating knowledge, funding, and expertise. And the second bit, and I think it was probably the most important thing I learned as a soldier, about clarity of mission, about understanding intent and purpose. What are you doing and why? And I think we didn't always get that right in the early days, but there was, I think, also this recognition that sometimes, like working in places like Namibia, Angola, after the end of the Civil War, you're given a mission by higher authority, by somebody sat in the MOD, but when you get on the ground, it's quite work. And there's sometimes a disconnect between what the higher authority want and what is needed on the ground. And I think in the context of grant making, I think the worry and the lesson learned was not to go in with a preordained idea or mission to impose it on people, was to find some common ground, to try and find a way that suited all parties. And I can talk more about that later.
Brilliant, thank you. I did forget to mention that at the end of the session, we'll have time for Q&A. So please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen or on that menu, wherever it is, to just type in your question as we go along, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. Julia?
Well, hey, it's lovely to be here as chair of Place Matters. It's incredible to see such an enormous turnout, people from all over the country interested, I hope, to share their experience of probably some of the most difficult stuff that anybody can engage in. How do you actually support communities to turn themselves around and have a greater future? They have a new government in a fortnight's time. Will that do anything? Governments haven't done much in the last 40 years really to make the change. Sometimes they lurch forward a bit. But my experience has been, I spent 20 years having the privilege of running business of community. And one of the main programs we ran was to try to get business leaders to understand what was happening on the front line in the poorest communities. And so I suppose I went on, heaven knows, 1,200 visits across the country into the drug rehab centre or the very poor housing estate or the very challenged primary school, taking business leaders to have a look, to meet the incredible people on the front line making the difference, and to see what they learned. And when I left that incredible job, I then became very fascinated largely with places beginning with B. And that was where David and I first met, in Burnley. And the reason for the places beginning with B is that I had gone to work directly for the Prince of Wales, responsible for supporting his charities, which he at that moment had 22, and trying to see what he was very passionate about. How could you get charities to work together with communities to make a difference in the poorest places? And the riots in Burnley had caused you, helpfully, to say that you were going to fund business in the community and the British Trust in Burnley to try and see post-riots what we could do. And it was at about that moment that the Prince of Wales said to me, Julia, I want you to be the czar. I want you to go and understand what the hell is going on and what we could do. And I did 10 years in Burnley. I spent quite a long time in Burslem as well, and Middlesbrough. And I've now spent 8 years in Blackpool. So the B's had it, and I've learned so much. I'd have been a much better chief executive of the business community if I'd done that before. I actually went from BITC, but we are where we are.
I remember the Burnley bit was the time spent knocking on doors. I remember meeting somebody called Superintendent Steve Hartley, who was a charismatic, he was brilliant, responsible for the day-to-day routine operations, and the police were going through that process of reinventing the wheel, introducing community policing at a stage where they didn't have that connection with community groups about what was happening, about the tensions that were clearly exposed in that small town. And we committed a small pot of money for the police to disseminate about developing community organisations, encouraging the growth of community groups. And at the same time, I met people like Richard Marsh from the Prince's Trust, and I'm talking to this in the community, and the idea of opening a joint office in the area where it was needed most made good sense. But I think it was that relational bit, the idea that you were spending time developing a strong flavour of not just what was needed, but who was making a difference on the ground. And very briefly, I was conscious that speaking to Richard Hopgood, who was then the chief exec of the Henry Smith charity, we committed about $500,000, not a huge amount of money in the first 3 years. I think they'd spent 3 times that. They didn't have, I think they'd given it to all the usual suspects, and I don't mean that in a dismissive way, but a lot of the bigger organisations and bigger charities who have the capacity to respond quickly to the writing bids, they suddenly realised that they didn't have that connection or that understanding on the ground. And I was asked as an intermediary to make recommendations to their board, and it was, I suppose, that in some way it opened the door to thinking of how we might work more collaboratively with other funders going forward.
And what I learned in Burnley by bringing the business world in, I remember Alan Layton was a great, powerful, funny risk taker. I remember him leading me, as seen as believing, bringing 12 business leaders into Burnley to basically walk streets and talk to the best community entrepreneurs who actually were making those differences. They weren't great national charities. They were 2 marvellous mums who set up an after-school drop-in club for whom they made hay. And nobody would have found them on a register of, who are the key charities. But if you walk the streets, you did find them. And they were the people, in my experience then, that you most need to get wind in their sails, power behind them, money to them, resources, that's why they're building, or whatever it happened to be. So the finding of, the front line is the bottom line, and the bottom line is the front line. And that was, for me, Burnley taught me that you just got to find where the local operators are, and back then to the ends of the earth.
And it goes back to one of your mantras, which is to connect the unconnected.
Yeah.
But it takes time to build the relationships with those who are less connected to those larger organizations who have the capacity and resources. And David, at Rank, you kind of stuck out as a funder when we were looking at different sort of models of this, as a funder who spent a lot of time on the ground getting to know people. So could you say a little bit more about how you do that?
I can. I think the other thing about if understanding mission was one of the lessons that I've learned, the second bit was about the old adage of time spent on reconnaissance is seldom ever wasted holds good in this business too. So the idea of spending time on the ground, kicking the tires, is important. And Rank have developed a field executive, if you like. All of our execs spend time on the ground visiting, so we don't fund anything that we haven't visited. I know it's not a model that will suit everybody, and particularly where you've got funders of significant scale might struggle to do that. But actually, for us, it's become the way that we do business. And I think that when you look at Hull, which is I think the first of the big programs, we spent about 18 months getting to know what was happening in the city. I think there is something about why Hull, why Dundee, why Plymouth, and I can talk about that later. But there is that sense of transformation and opportunity that is important. And I think that reconnaissance feeds into that. So we're looking for the right people to fund. And I think in Hull, we funded 21 programs. I think this was a partnership venture with the Esme Fairburn Foundation. So we were co-funding, we were running a lot of the field work, the ground. And I think one of the challenges, of course, is how do you begin to manage that program? And that's, I could talk briefly about that if you like. The fact is when you've got 21 organisations, you hold the first meeting in what was the police headquarters, had a brand new conference room, 21 organisations, everybody brought somebody else. So you had about 42, then you had local authority, prison, probation, education, you had about 60, 70 people in the room. And we had no idea how we were going to manage that. Even if you went round everybody just for a brief update, it would take many hours. So we had to think differently about how we connected and supported that. And I think there is something about this journey that led us on this recognition that there's more to it than just money. This relational philanthropy, this combination of intellectual, social, financial sort of capital is where we see the added value. And I think they've been running sort of in tandem, if you like, as we discover how to become this relational philanthropist, if you like, and at the same time just recognizing the value of kicking the tires and reconnaissance is pivotal to everything we do.
And I think I learned in Burnley in 10 years, where, you know, admittedly, you've got the Prince of Wales, a hell of a convener, who came every year for 5 years. And in the end, I thought, well, quite soon, I thought, we're not just going to use this on Burnley. We put together Burnley, Burslem, so-called Trent Towns, Middlesbrough, Redcar, and Tottenham. I pulled 20 people, 20 leaders, community leaders, public service, police, all the rest of it, together and had a conference all together. And in the morning, we just put the places together, and in the afternoon, we put the types together. So you put the doctors or the police officers or the job centres or whatever it was. And by God, that was a rich, mixed conversation.
Yeah.
And you suddenly realise that actually what Burslem had done, driving connections around the Middleport pottery, and sparked something which is now happening in Middlesbrough, because Frankie Wales, that incredible character who runs a great boxing club, and got a connection with it. So it's not just connecting the unconnecting, it's then connecting those who are on that journey together. And that's the drive for Place Matters. That's the drive for a webinar like this. What do people learn, which we should be learning and passing on?
Super important. And actually, one other thing that comes to mind is oftentimes funders or those who are really, wanting to support change and help build capacity for change are coming in from the outside. They're not born and bred there.
Yeah.
And that can be quite difficult for both the people coming in, but also communities who are thinking, well, we know about this place. Who are you? So I just wondered how did you kind of deal with that type of dynamic? How did you build those genuine relationships with community?
Well, I'll touch briefly on Dundee. I was conscious that we were already funding 4 or 5 programs in Dundee. They were mostly youth programs, but we had some flavour and feeling for what was happening in a comparatively small city, where if you had cancer, you died younger than anywhere else in Scotland, where teenage pregnancies were still an issue. And there was an opportunity, I think, to look at Dundee as a city that was on that brink of transformation. We knew that the huge amount of investment was promised to develop the waterfront. The V&A was part of that. But also conscious when you visit Dundee that if you live in some of the estates away from the city centre, that actually connecting with that investment on the waterfront is a difficult pill for them to follow, to understand. So we spent time doing what we've done in the past. Andrew Muirhead, who was the then Chief Executive Inspiring Scotland, helped to open some doors. So we were visiting the DC Thompson. We went to see people who were running the businesses there. We spent a lot of time knocking on the doors of charities. We went to the housing officers that worked for Dundee City Council. And when we met the Chief Executive of Dundee City Council, David Dorman, the following day, he was rather irritated that these English people had been knocking on the doors of his housing officers, and he wanted to know why. And I think what we tried to explain that we were trying to put together a package in Dundee that would work alongside the council to fill some of the gaps. But actually, it was that issue of trust that I think we had to overcome. And I think you do that by spending time on reconnaissance, building relationships over time, and also recognizing that we weren't in a hurry. We didn't have to get this done within a couple of months' time. It wasn't just 3 years. All of our place-based programs have run for around 10 years. And although the funding and the focus might change, the flavour might change during that period, we're in it for the long term. And I think that relationship and that trust comes from that. And I think that the second bit of it, and I can talk more about that if time permits, was this a right hole where we struggled about evaluation. How do you evaluate 21 programs or 25 programs? And if half of them thrive, that's a good thing, I think. But how do you encourage them to collaborate and to connect and to share and to build that network, to improve their network, that voice, that standing? And I think the difference in Dundee, learning from the mistakes, if you like, in Hull, was to think about a theory of change. So even though you funded 25 things, the theory of change, our evaluators worked with us as a group, they worked with the funding partners as a group, and then brought us all together. And I think the idea of bringing us together So there was an overarching mission as to how we might connect and contribute and hold our feet to the fire. And it's about long term and about and not imposing your will, your mission on people, but growing it from beneath, lighting the fire from beneath, if you like.
That's great. Really interesting, Julia.
It's about long term. And that's why potentially the new government might be in for 10 years. My God, they should not say they're going to do anything in under 10 years. It's just a launch mellow, is what generally happens with junior ministers. And they last for a second, they've gone, they've given up on the project. And it's not surprising that nothing ever happens, because we don't say, right, we're in this 10 years. And the other thing I think I learned is that, and oddly enough, I learned it first when I was at Business Community watching London first get going. A great man called Stephen O'Brien, succeeded by Joe Valentine, said, we've got to promote London, but we've got to make London more promotable. And when I went to do a lot of work in Australia, it was exactly the same mantra in Melbourne. We've got to promote Melbourne, but we've got to make Melbourne more promotable. So when I arrived in Burnley, and it was mainly about Steve Rumbelow, the local authority, and the great Gordon Birtwistle, who was the great leader who got the BNP, and all politicians have got to be elected, basically. So you just accept that, of course, anything that happens will always have been achieved by the politicians. They are the single people who make anything happen. This, of course, is not true, but you just have to live with the fact that is what democracy is about. And I think I realised then, talking in Burnley, particularly to the private sector, that the Burnley corporates really loathed the local authority. They could find nothing good to say about it. They just could not stop moaning on about how they hadn't got planning permission for their Rockland Box extension. And what you needed to do was to build the Burnley bondholders, who were the business leaders. And in public, they were to say nothing horrid about the local authority and the democratic arrangement. In private, they could say what you think you're doing. But in public, you've got to promote Burnley and make Burnley more promotable. And that therefore means in my book that no challenged place will turn itself around without the strongest of partnerships between the private, the public, and the community and voluntary sector. And if you don't have them together, you haven't got hope.
And I'd love to spend more time on that topic, actually, because that's such an important part of place-based change work and a really challenging part of it, as well, as we all know. But before we get to that, there's something about the sort of building community capacity for change that, David, you talked about a little bit in around Holland's really special. And one of the learning that came out of the big local was just how important it was, not just for communities to receive funding as investments to do what they wanted to do, but also really around support for capacity building, which many communities have just not had that investment into for a long time. I just wanted to go back to the Dundee example, because the idea of Rank sort of funding 25 odd organizations and how that kind of helped build the capacity of the third sector and what that might have led to. Just curious if you could say more about that.
Yeah, I think I was in Dundee just last week, and we're probably almost 10 years into that program. So we're at the back end of our funding for Dundee, but the network is very much strong and alive, and I think it has a stronger, the social sector has a stronger presence and voice in the city. I know David Dorwood, that irritated chief exec, when he retired, we asked him to become our local associate director. And I think that it is worth mentioning that in every case, and Hull, we came to it quite late, having somebody in the city, in the town, in the place to act, not just to manage the program, but really as a sort of a conduit between local authorities, between business, social sector, and the community, but also to act as a magnet for future opportunities and investment. And David has done an extraordinary job. And I think working with people like Jackie Close and Faith in the Community, when COVID hit, there was no question that the response by the social sector was quicker than the local authority could map. They couldn't. And I think I was very conscious that there was a painter and decorator there called John Alexander, who had a lot of vans and drivers who weren't being used, and he then connected. He's gone on to do great things in the city about training young people for various different skills. But it was how it all came together, and how the social sector has and David Dorr being part of that. I know that there's something called the Big Hoose Project, working with a program that is preventing huge amounts of waste going into landfill and connecting from towels to sheets to nappies to toilet bowls, whatever. I was there the other week, and he's opened a huge warehouse. So it's continuing to evolve, and there is a sense of connectedness. There is a stronger sense of community and voice. And I don't think Rank didn't just make that happen, but we helped to build that capacity, to build that confidence, to build that capability.
And I remember speaking to Jackie Close, and actually she was in another webinar a while back, but she did say that typically for an organization of her size, we didn't have the core funding to be able to go to these meetings. That wasn't about frontline delivery. So the Rank funding enabled her to, in fact, that's what she said that you asked for, which is, we don't need big reports. We just want you to get together every quarter as 25 organizations to just get to know each other and share learning and start collaborating together where it makes sense. And that then, sprang into action when COVID hit in a way that nobody could have predicted. So it's a wonderful story.
And the building of the capacity of the partnership between the private, public, and voluntary sector is what I think I've learned most about post-Burnley and going to Blackpool, where business in the community, which I was the continue to the Vice Patron of or something, had managed to get the lottery very helpfully to back business brokers, because there was a view, and I think rightly, that you will not get the business world to connect into the community world unless there is somebody, an honest broker, who is basically the connector. And up in Blackpool, amazingly, there was a lovely man called Andy Charles, who was the son of the GP in South Shore, it's Blackpool, who worked for Lloyds Bank. Thank God was seconded back to Blackpool. And he got hold of me and said, Julia, I need help. It's all well and good. My wheels are whirring in the mud a bit in Blackpool. I need some national connectivity to help me. And I said, darling Andy, I will do anything for you within reason. I'll come once a month for 48 hours, and I'll go on for as long as it takes. And I've now been going to Blackpool for 9 years, so I have seen the power, the building of the trust between the private, public, and voluntary sector. And I think now, much helped by a great local authority who met a time, I mean, they were challenging, but I think they would agree now that they are much more open to the importance of the rest of the sectors coming together to help promote this absolutely incredible place that is Blackpool, with such opportunity, but such celebration. We are really, we're at the top of practically, well, we're getting better, but we have been highest level of drug deaths, highest level of kids in care, highest level of things. And it's taken us 8 years to come together as a partnership. The writing of the prospectus has been an important bit where governments have, in this instance, been helpful, because Joe Valentine, who'd done work in London first, knew about how to write a prospectus for Crossrail. And she came to Blackpool for 2 years and helped us to write the prospectus of what was it that we needed, what were we going to do, what were the big visions, but what were the actionable first steps. And the 4th iteration of that prospectus has just come out. And you can see the change over the 8 years. You can see the 90 million that Michael goes, that God given us for housing, but you can see that health is now the biggest bloody issue. The got to tackle. And we are beginning to do so, thanks to Jane Riney of the amazing Arif, who's the public health director up there. But it's taken the all the sectors to say, what do we do? And that's what one must forget. It isn't one sector alone. The voluntary community sector will do great stuff, But if you haven't got them tied in
Yeah.
to the strategic future of the place, it's never going to work.
I think that's right, and I think as we've grown in confidence and also recognising that we are limited in terms of our funding, our own capability and capacity. I think and I know you visited Plymouth, Plymouth was also, I think at that point where they were described as, and I think the accreditation of becoming the UK's first social enterprise city. And I think the difference there is that we spoke to the local authority to get an understanding of the strategic vision in the city before we did anything else, and then started to build up the knowledge and the network around a few anchor organisations. But working with partners like the School for Social Entrepreneurs, we probably helped to create over 50 social enterprises in the city using match training. And the idea being that you're there to enrich and to help grow that social enterprise culture, and working with people like Rio, who you know, and iridescent ideas, who help to drive that agenda forward. And through that, I think, through things like, I don't know if we can talk about participatory grants. I think the reason I mentioned that, because I think it was we started to use our funding in a different way. And I think it was that idea of using not just grants, but repayable grants. And I think the participatory grants program is worth mentioning, because I think it allowed us to work with key players in the city that we otherwise would not have done, like the Director of Public Health, the Chief Executive of the local hospital, Live Well, which is a local sort of integrated care and social service provider. And they were the advisory board that helped to look at how we might tackle loneliness and social isolation. And we've done that in a way by then employing a local board to make decisions about local issues, local need. And I think that we've become more sophisticated, but it does go back to the fact that, and I'm ever conscious that when we do this, and mindful that we've got another program developing in Scotland now, is the importance of connecting with other players earlier in the process than we've ever done, and the need for greater collaboration and partnerships, more so now than at any time in the past.
So it's a real evolution between Dundee, where the chief executive talking on our story, to actually proactively going to meet people in the local authorities to understand what their vision is and how to connect that together.
Don't irritate them before you start.
Yes, it's a good lesson there. But when you described Blackpool, I remember you mentioned something how, everyone was wearing their stilettos in the beginning, and now they're wearing their garden shoes. So I just wondered, there's sometimes a lot of times competition within the community sector, between different sectors within a place, and lots of perhaps, difficult relationships in the past that one has to get over, and that they have to get over in order to collaborate. I just wondered, how did that evolve in Blackpool?
Well, I think in Blackpool, the challenge had been that there'd been so little money coming in to the voluntary and community sector, and any money that had come in, by and large, not being funneled by them, but had probably been funneled by the local authority. That you got people are very scratchy when they're frightened about their futures. So part of, I think, what is that we began to, I hope, recognise the capacity and the importance of the voluntary sector, really got them around the table on what do we need to do. We've got some great funders in, and this is where the philanthropy world can help so much to make it work better. But then I think if you look at the government machine, they can cause the most fascinating opportunities and challenges. So I remember having some influence, I hope, with Julia Cleverdon and Helen Stevenson, both of whom at that moment were senior people in the Department of Education, and they added Blackpool to the opportunity area list, which Justine Green was there for about 14 months, decided let's do a depth charge in 14 places. And one thought, quick, should we add 30 seconds? And she was indeed. But we got 6 million, as did 13 other places, Hastings, Doncaster, Bradford, blah. And my God, we used that money to really get going to help build some of the works that the smaller voluntary sector were doing outside schools. So, I think I would say in any situation, there are three things you could do. You could float, because you've got no idea what you're doing. You can snorkel, because you can get right down onto one very small piece of the rock, or you can surf. And the real objective in life is to take whatever bad piece of funding has come through the door and surf with luck in the direction of where you were trying to get the totality to go, and spread it around as much as you can.
Great analogies.
Surfing and snorkeling.
Surfing and snorkeling.
And floating.
And floating.
Floating.
That's a bit strong, I think.
Well, that's brilliant. So why don't we, I know that we talked to in the past about sort of going from sort of connecting all of the players within a place.
Right.
There's this bit then about, you know, as much as place-based change is absolutely necessary for any meaningful change around people's lives, if it's not connected to national levers, there's a bit of a limit to what any place can do on their own, just because we know we live in a very centralized environment and lots of levers are with regional, national, statutory, and other types of organizations. So just wondered, you know, how have you, in your sort of learning and experience, tried to connect place with national?
Well, this is, in my book, one of the most things we need to do, is to find the people born in that place and now somewhere else, potentially able to influence, help back into the place. So, Burnley, where we started with the local newspaper, born in Burnley, where are they now? And I got more business leaders who started their working life as working for Burnley Engineering at the age of 14, to then come back and to mentor 3 businesses with the greatest capacity to grow. And the man who came back turned out to be the chief executive of GKN. And when I rang him up and said, please come once to Burnley, I need your help, he said, when would you like? I come on Tuesday. You know, really passionate about what you could do. So some of it is where are they now to help? And some of it is how do you get to the levers that that community needs? So Burnley had been moving on, a brilliant collection of characters, running a team trying to get the Todmorden curve reopened.
Glad to say it has reopened.
Well,
It's connected dear old Accrington to Manchester again, but that's another story.
it did, but you know why it did that? Because, and well, I'm not sure I can tell the story anyway, I'm going to. When the Prince of Wales came to Burnley and got the lovely team who were trying to get the Todmorden curve reopened, 7 miles of bloody track, as he said rather crossly, he could have dug it in the amount of time and spent discussing it. Why did it never be on the strategic rail authorities list?
Yeah.
When you looked at what it would do, it would cut the journey time from Manchester to Burnley from an hour 20 to 38 minutes or something rather. Nuts, and it was going to cost 7 million. And to be honest, I wrote a letter to Prince of Wales to send to the man in charge of transport, Robert Devereux, saying I'm taking a great interest in Burnley and I don't quite understand why the Burnley Todmorden curve has never been prioritised. You're not enough. Following year it was prioritised. And as you said, it now has opened up the Manchester yuppies to come and live in the Burnley incredible mills and Accrington, and it's, you know, and transport so much out all this.
It is, yeah.
So how do you find the levers to pull which will make the difference? And some of that is about where you find corporates that could be doing more for their place. If only you could discover who the responsibility director is. I mean, marvelous example going on with business community now. They found a senior partner of Linklaters who was born in Newport in Wales. And he now appears to be leading the Newport support work. And you think, what the hell is a Linklater senior partner doing? Of course he cares about it. So some of this is about happenstance and by mistake and, you know, magic, really.
And I think that there is something about trying to align the stars and the, and I wonder, inspired by people like Liz Weaver, some of you will have come across, I know you have, about Tamarac's work in driving down poverty in Canada, at regional level and a city level in rural communities, and doing that impressively, and listening to Liz talking about the early days of struggling to find out the measures, the metrics, what is the North Star, knowing what it is you're trying to do, and so people can align in a way that they haven't in the past. And I think there is clearly much more to be done. I know we were talking before about Rank's latest program in Sunderland. Sunderland is another city that I think is sat in the shadow with bigger brother in Newcastle. There is a real sense of transformation and opportunity there. And the Rank's commitment now to try and grow that. There was something around film about that. I'm often talking about serendipity, but it isn't really. It's about the power of networks. In Sunderland, they're going to build the biggest film studios, media studios outside of Hollywood. And by chance that we're working with the Sean Connery Foundation in Scotland and the National Film and Television School. I've just met somebody from the Grayson Trust who get you the Grayson Trust of the UK's awards, but they're the Oscars for documentaries. But they've been working for about 10 years getting kids from disadvantaged backgrounds into the film industry. We have our own media company. We're funding something called Future in Film. Our own heritage is in film. At Pinewood Studios, of the great films we were talking about before about Brief Encounter and the characters. But the question isn't really about just about the film. Is how do you begin to make those connections in Sunderland, especially around young people, to get them jobs in that huge opportunity, that huge industry. It's not just about film and technology and the media bits. It's about everything that's needed to support it in terms of catering, driving, electricians, whatever it might be. And I think that the need for that joined up conversation has already started. With our associates in Sunderland, the difference there, learning from the experience of part, we brought Jen on early, and she's already, by LinkedIn, I think she's connected with a guy in Hollywood who is connected to a production studios, is connected to the Grayson Trust, and they're hosting one of our young people that we're supporting in January this year. So there is something about aligning the stars. And it's not just about serendipity. It is that power of networking and doing that in a more strategic way. And perhaps you could answer about the opportunity for Place Matters, not just about a medium for sharing and learning, but as a connector, as a delivery agent, to really steer the way through towards achieving strategic change, systems change, and mobilizing resources in a very measured and focused way. And I think there is an opportunity for a third party to do it. I know that we as a foundation don't have the skill set, don't have the capacity, and something's missing there, I think.
But it is about, it goes back to your original point about connecting the unconnected. But once you've begun to get the energy running, and it is about energy, and it is about candor, and it is about bringing all the sectors and all their connections together. The fun of the Blackpool Private Place Partnership is just staggering when you pick up what's happened with Strictly this year. How are we doing on the opportunities? Who are the new people coming into town? Where else in Britain will you find 2,000 magicians for a fortnight practicing their dark arts? And then you say, right, well, I see a lot of magicians going, what's the next thing? Well, we're trying to get the year of dance, right? Who do I know? Darcy Bass. She can stop hopping about in Plymouth and join what's coming to be at Black, which of course she's been marvellous on Strictly. So it is about trying to get energized energy into what are the opportunities. Yeah. People never stop producing bloody risk registers. I just say, I'm just not prepared to look at them. Let's just have opportunity registers, shall we? Let's see, who do we know? How do we connect? How do we make this happen? And that's where John Fallon, who's the new chair of the Blackpool Private Place Partnership, working across great local authority energy, great private sector, new companies come in. How do you turn Blackpool into Silicon Sands? How do you connect Blackpool to Fleetwood? How do you get Fleetwood to work to Morecambe Bay? How do you get Morecambe Bay to talk to Barrow? How do we get that whole coastline to rise up? Yeah. Once you start it, and that is about having, in my experience, a backbone organisation who are not they're not private sector, they're not public sector, they're not voluntary sector. They are there like Tamarack and Liz Weaver have taught us. They're there to hold the ring for the place and to be trusted and to help find the opportunities. I mean, in Burnley, the most important single thing that Alan Leighton did was to say to Steve Rumble, who's the chief executive, other 20 businesses with the greatest capacity to grow in Burnley. Steve Rumble gazed into the middle distance because they spent their time saying, let's just pray. The telephone company will arrive with 3,000 jobs. Yeah. Well, it's very, very unwise to allow a telephone company to arrive with 3,000 jobs. It's better to get 20 companies to put on 50% each and you sort out what would we need to do with this on the thing. On the education side, I think, is one of the other critical bits of how do you hold the schools or the college together to really help see where we're going. And in Blackpool, the opportunity area helped there because it did give us 6 million to get the team together, even though they were all separate academy chains. To say, in Blackpool, we've got the largest pupil referral unit anywhere. I think we had 620 kids in it. Absolutely shocking. So you do the analysis as to who is excluding these kids, and you discover, surprise, 80-20. And you begin to say, okay, what would it take for all of us to agree that everybody will only exclude 3 kids, and after they've done that, they'll pick up the entire costs of moving those children through until they're 18. Catastrophic. Odd enough, pupil referral unit numbers light.
Yeah, what do you think?
So it is about how can you get the partnership which says this is not good enough for our community. We together are going to do something about it. And that takes a real piece of work and energy and drive and strategy.
And then it gets us to the nitty-gritty part of this work, doesn't it? Because what you talked about so brilliantly before was about sort of the passion, the energy, bringing people who really care about the place together to do something really amazing together. But it does take a bit of that nitty-gritty, behind the scenes, coordination, some of the boring administrative tasks of what coordination and connecting takes. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about both of your learning along this journey. You know, whether it be the field director or the backbone team, as you call them, Julia, what forms have they taken? What are they provided in this that's been really helpful?
I think the levers that Rank have used over even though the strategy changes and the needs of each of the places in the cities vary, it's going to be different. You can't go in with a preordained plan and parachuting, as I mentioned right at the very beginning. So there's something about that. What are the ways in which we found that have worked most effectively? One of that goes back to Lord Rank's days, where he saw young people as a seed corn of tomorrow. And it's about leadership, about trying to find local leaders to help develop and support those. And I suppose that when you look at the characteristics or the bits that connect all the dots throughout all the places from Blackpool to Burnley to Hull to Dundee, more recently in Sunderland, our work in South Wales, the huge piece of work that we're doing with the Department of Communities in Northern Ireland, now building capacity in the social sector. It is about backing leaders, about supporting leaders. And we've done that through not just supporting outstanding leaders in the community, often running the social sector or the charities, but also things like Time to Shine and the Rank of 5 program, where you're actually putting money into developing young leaders to develop capacity and capability and confidence. But also the fact that we did something in Hull, the Hull and East Yorkshire 100 with the Claw social leadership team, and we're going to repeat that. Though I think they've just put their advert out last week, looking at how we might support leaders from Middlesbrough and Redcar through to Sunderland. But there is something about that I think that sort of resonates with me. That I think it's been a constant theme, if you like, that underpins all of our work.
Yeah, and I think you've got to get the basics of the partnership between the sectors, and then begin to really get far stronger community voices into the conversation. And I've learned 2 things. One, I personally, Dane with a campaign falls off a train every other month. and chairs the Claremont team. And the Claremont team's the team in the poorest ward in Blackpool. And I have 35 people to that meeting. Some are community leaders and community activists, or some are marvelous people who've been running the chatty bus for 5 years. And some are the police officers, the environmental health officers, the housing officers, the marvellously woman, thank God, who's appears to be running the primary care network, who's brought more energy out of the health sector than I think I've seen in the last 8 years. And every 2 months we go through what are the figures, how are we reducing public service demand, what are the reasons that the police have been caught. And I'm sure it could be done by somebody other than me, but at this moment we seem to be pulling together what are the public service doing in Claremont? What are the community thinking about what the public service are doing in Claremont? And what are we learning? And that isn't done for the whole of Blackpool, lots of other great things going on. For me, that gives me a real litmus test as to whether this is moving along.
Yeah.
And I do think you have to do the real grit on that. And the other thing I suppose I learned is that you can pick up stuff all over the place, hence the importance of place matters. So, you know, the incredible work going on in Grimsby, led by that question, thriving spirit, the football club. Bradford really doing some interesting stuff. And the thing which I think now we need to concentrate on is getting the young voices into the conversation. So in Ipswich, and I think now in Blackpool, and certainly in Young Manchester, really exciting to see the way in which young people are saying, this is the future for our town, this is what we want, this is how to do it. And I think the next 5 years, I hope the average age of those who are working on turning around towns will come down from probably as well. How old are you?
Too old.
There we are, too old. Into being really driven by great young activists. And that's what I see in the Fair Education Alliance. You see an incredible number of young people concerned about what they can do to make their place better.
Yeah. And you talk about the importance of learning, which I know is very near and dear to your heart. And I remember there was an example you shared many moons ago about sort of you're helping on a sort of study visit, and you got a group from one place to visit another place. I can't remember the names now, but it was transformative. And I just wonder if you could share what that experience was like.
Well, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I took a love from Jane Cohen, who runs the incredible trams operation. We rejoice with us. You'll be able to get off Blackpool North Station, get straight into a tram, and it will take you right down to the sea. And that's entirely Jane Cohen. It's amazing. And she at one moment was leading on the health work with me in Claremont. And I said, God, Jane, I understand nothing about this. What is the issue? And I come across something in Bradford called Born in Bradford, which is tracking young people, babies born, and then using the evidence about them, surprise, surprise, feed back into schools and say, you know, if you put first babies into school in September, they will bump along the whole of the bottom, the whole of their primary. Don't put them until April, or in Bradford, and they will soar. Let's go and see why we can't do what they're doing in Bradford in Blackpool. It was the most depressing meeting we ever had in our life. We got there, we understood it all, we brought it back to Blackpool. Blackpool said basically, piss off, we're already doing something called better together or something or other, and it's got it all under control.
Yeah.
And I've just discovered a lovely character we urge everybody to find, who are out of the NHS, and they're called the Priority Ward Zone Investigation Team.
That sounds scary.
They're part of population health, and they've done the analysis for Claremont, which says with 9,000 people in Claremont, they cost the Blackpool Infirmary £11 million.
Yeah.
And when you look into it, you think, okay, so whose responsibility is it to try and get that put down? Black human misery better? Well, it's work in progress. But by God, it's so important to actually learn from other places. It doesn't always work, but you can sometimes get a gold dust out of you. What you've done in Plymouth and you've done in Dundee, I mean, it's just staggering stuff. And that's why Place Matters has got the 20 philanthropists together to say, what are the philanthropists doing?
I think it's an exciting opportunity really to see what place. I think AI might form a part of that. You say, I'm too thick to know how it might look, how it might benefit. But for bigger and better brains than me, it just reinforces the need for that backbone organisation, whether that's Place Matters or something else, to take that role in mobilising resources in a concentrated and focused way in order to bring about more impactful, more strategic change.
I mean, it may be that local authorities will play that role in the future. They haven't been able to for the last 10 years. They've had any money. But I went to Tim Brighouse's memorial meeting on Saturday. It was one of the most inspirational education leaders we've ever had. And whenever Tim ran Oxfordshire education or Birmingham education, or then came with John Coles to run the London Challenge, you know, the road rose up to meet him and said, come on, Tim, let's get this together, let's sort it out. Yeah. And so I think leadership at the authority level, leadership potentially at mayoral level, may be able to engage and infuse and inspire and have the pots of funding carefully and well led to do it. But I think at the moment, we've got to have backbone organisations.
And actually, that's a really good point with greater devolution. We are seeing mayors and combined authorities taking on really innovative takes.
Absolutely.
Thinking about public service, thinking about how to engage with communities in a fundamentally different way.
Yeah.
So putting their money where their mouth is, because, cradle to career in Liverpool City.
Of course, I mean, it was Graham Duncan and Birkenhead, but now it's spreading across Birkenhead. I mean, it's a staggering piece of energy drive, and it's in my book that's got magic in it.
Definitely. Well, we're almost at the top of the hour, and we want to give some time to some of the questions that have come through. There's been some really great questions, and please keep them coming, because we are going to dedicate some good time into that. But before we go on to the Q&A, just sort of last words from both of you around why is it so important in your views now, today? Why is this work more urgent than ever in your view? Because, based on what we were talking about before, I know that came up as a big theme. But also, what would your sort of last words of advice be for communities, organizations, local authorities, funders looking to really engage more in this work?
Well, real change is achieved, I think McKinsey's always said, and I think on this one they're right, by the highest level of nose and front line. And that is true in any business or in anywhere else. And I've taught for years, boringly, that there are two different ways of making coffee. You can have a cafetiere where you can plunge the message down, crushing the grounds underneath, and that is a way of taking decisions. But the moment you plunge like that, you crush the grounds who are actually the single most important people who can make change. So a better way of making coffee, even though you scold yourself occasionally and it can go very wrong, is a percolator, where you bubble it up and you give the power local level. And it's messy and it won't always look the same, thank God. It will be shaped on the context. That's what I learned chairing the National Literacy Trust, is that how you get literacy going in the back streets of Gateshead is different to how you get it going in the back streets of Swindon. They are different places and you've got to work the context that you're in. So for me, the answer lies in giving far more power at very local level to towns and places to see how they can use the energy of their grounds to make a difference, and try to do rather less of plunging things down.
Well, we've done a lot of plunging over the years and it just hasn't
Made it a giant hole.
Yeah, thank you for that, Julia. David?
I think I'm going to richly endorse the idea of lighting the fire from beneath. And I think when you lose that dynamic or you ignore it, you do it at the peril you're trying to achieve. So bringing the community with you is important. I think that second bit, going back to the very beginning, is the time spent on reconnaissance is important. Don't neglect it. You need to spend time kicking the tires, getting a flavour. And if you can't do it directly, find an organisation, people that can. And I just recognise that in very simplistic terms, there's less money around, social media is growing. We've got 1,000 people in our network. Brentnet is 1,000 strong now. Many of them are struggling. So the need for greater collaboration and partnerships has got to be core to what we do in the future.
Thank you
At
both.
least that.
Thank you both. And I know we could be here for many, many more hours talking about more stories and learning, but I just wanted to bring in some of these questions, and thank you for those. They're great questions. There's a couple of them actually around the theme about really sort of bringing the community voice at the center of this work. And the question being how, what I want to hear more about is, that I'm looking at Simon's question here, is how to enable the residents living in a place to be the agents of change, not just those identified as leaders. What is your learning of enabling this?
Well, I mean, it's the $64,000 challenge, so typified in the Grenfell Tower inquiry. And right back to Empire in the earliest days of the building of residents' voices and all of that. Do I think we've learned how to do it? I think there are places in the country who've done it much better than others. I think the social enterprise model has been really helpful when you are engaging residents in the enterprise, which actually keeps the place together, runs the concierge, sorts out the grass, finds the green spaces, doing things together. We've learned quite a lot of National Literacy Trust about finding the community champions on literacy, who are often the mums who really have managed to adore reading, love reading, get their kids to read, and can find 5 other mums on their staircase to do likewise. I think it's about starting with where people are, what they want to do, and not imposing programs on them. This is again bottom-up stuff, but it does take real hard and costly volunteer coordinated work to do it. I think community organisers have done a good job in some places and fallen on stony grounds in other. So it is absolutely at the heart of it. I think housing associations and housing estates are probably where we need to share most knowledge.
Interesting. Yeah, David?
We've talked briefly before this about Kate in Place Matters, which is a dementia charity, not Place
Mind Matters.
I'm losing the
name. Yeah.
It's a dementia charity set up in Plymouth by somebody who was a nurse. And I think it was the idea that the participatory grants program was built around one of the ideas about how we might tackle social isolation and loneliness, particularly post-pandemic. I mentioned it very briefly earlier, but I think it's the way that we've recruited a local advisory board, people of all ages and backgrounds, not just there in authority. I think there was a quote I read yesterday from a young 18-year-old saying what a privilege it is to be in a position that he can influence the progressive change, make an impact in the community in which he and his family lives. And I think it's just that willingness to spend time with local people, local communities, trying to find out what it is. And I think that, I think it's a big step for a foundation as well, for trustees to delegate the authority effectively and significant chunks of funding, of money, to local people to be able to respond, identify, and support local needs. So there's something about sort of reconnaissance, relationships, and everything we've been saying really, but I think it goes back to that thing we said earlier about lighting the fire from beneath, about not trying to impose your ideas, your solutions on local people, local communities. And it isn't just the community leaders, those who would identify themselves, it's the whole community, I think, and giving them a stronger voice.
And that's, I mean, I think I learned during COVID that the single most important unit of change in the poorest places is primary school, led by entrepreneurial, connected heads, great teachers with fantastic connections to their communities. And I hope that the new lot, if they get in, will see primary schools as an enormously important part of the social infrastructure. Because there is a line, oh no, schools can only do what only schools can do. When actually I suspect building trust in poor communities is better done by places that communities trust, which by and large are primary schools.
Yeah.
Once you're into secondary, it's too far away. We don't want that anywhere near. But actually, I was interested in talking to Matt Hyder's Scouts the other day, and in fact, in Unity in Blackpool, they found that running cubs inside schools is getting a bigger pickup because parents trust dropping leaving their children in the primary school rather than taking them back to tea and then back to the church hall.
Yeah.
So for me, finding the community buildings that are trusted and building services around that.
That
is cost effective.
Anchor organization.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's another question actually that relates to that from Lucy that I want to bring in as well, which was around, I'd like to talk about partnership and coming together to align around change. What experience would the panel share about how to deal with differences of views and what to do initially to give partnerships? I've lost it now.
Yeah, greater sustainability.
There you go.
That's it, yeah.
Well, getting some early wins on the board is how you, in my experience, pick something that by and large is not enormously contentious, go all out to make that happen. That builds the trust between everyone. A sense of humour is quite important in these matters, I think, to be honest. Okay, I mean, we're not going to do that at the moment. Nobody else is in favour of that. Live to fight another day. What can we agree on? 80% of what you want to do, people will agree on. And it is about building the trust and the partnership. I always remember Sheffield years back saying they'd gone on a visit together to China with some interesting memories. And they'd had such a terrible time bumping about the back of the lorry they were in. By the time they came back to Sheffield, they were welded as a team. And the fact that kids disagreed with why didn't seem to matter. So find some ways of building a common energy. Okay, you think we should be putting the bloody bus shelter over there, and X thinks they should be putting it there. Let's stop discussing the bus shelter and let's get on with something else. It doesn't always work, but I do think too much doesn't happen because we pussyfoot about, oh, we don't want to upset X and then Y, and then say, find some common things you can do.
I chair a town centre partnership board in Hyndburn and Accrington. That now has about 15 board members, including the local authority, local MP. When they're there, they're no longer there until we're appointed in a couple of weeks' time. You've got local business people, education, college, and all of it. It can be challenging, but there is something about having that sense of overarching mission, that intent and purpose, and that vision about trying to drag people back to this vision that we all agree with.
Yeah.
So that you're right, it's not just about whether the bus shelter goes in street A and not street B, but just kind of gently bring people back. But I think what is important about that kind of group is the representation.
Yeah.
And that actually I think more often than not, I find that actually it's easier to find a consensus about the way forward than you otherwise might think. But it's about how it's chaired. I think you need a charismatic chair to help.
Always essential.
deliver that.
And that is one very basic building block of change. There's a question from Ed that I want to bring in as well. Ed from Plymouth. I got that we need to bring a new and private money into more deprived communities.
Yeah, that's
However,
yeah.
how do we know, and how do we do that in a way that doesn't just drive gentrification and move social problems around?
Ed, come to Blackpool and have a look at what they've done on getting the Blackpool Coastal Housing Team together, which is owned by the local authority. And I think, pray God, I think we've got DLAP somewhere on this call. I think we've got the deal that actually the Blackpool Coastal Housing Team, which is owned by the locals, will do the 90 million rebuild. I hope I've pushed that much. I think I am.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, well, what do I think? I think we've absolutely got to hold the line for communities that the value has got to come back to them. If I hear one more conversation about what the social value is, 326 billion bags of boring concrete, which has come into Blackpool, and this is allegedly all now with apprenticeships.
Yeah.
I keep saying, right, I'd like to meet all these apprenticeships, and there must be hundreds of them. Any of them, where are they? So you've got to hold the line on, as you say, not just driving gentrification and moving social problems around. You've got to really, and that does mean tackling the NIMBYs who say they don't want the homeless shelter on this corner. You know, I'm sorry, that's just not on. If you're going to be an inclusive society, you've got to have homeless who, you know, can happen to any of us. You've got to do the things that hold people in their communities and help them get back onto their potential trajectory if you can get it right.
I think of Wendy and Hannah in Nudge in Plymouth, who were working in Stonehouse, in the area that was, you know, formerly pubs and bars frequented by sailors, marines, and soldiers. As they have left, there's this huge vacuum there. And one of the problems with development and seizing opportunities is that private developers come in and will gentrify. And they've challenged that. They've challenged that by using resources sensibly. We used our repayable grants. You know, I think when they needed 250k, I'm not sure how much supposed to be saying this in public, but the fact is they needed a big chunk of cash quickly, in order to secure a building. And they do that through a community share scheme, community ownership schemes, and the local community are driving forward the change in an otherwise impoverished area of Plymouth, and it's in community hands and community leadership, and it will always be a balance, and they're aware of the challenges of those who are competing for the same buildings and the same space.
And that's where you need courage and bravery and better society capital and all the rest of it, you know, what Power to Change did to prove to us that actually communities were more than capable of taking on the pub, taking on the broken down ice house in Grimsby. What the hell is that ice house in Grimsby? I've heard about that for years, isn't it? So we just do have to hold the line.
Yeah. And it actually goes to the last question that we have time for from Nick that I just wanted to bring. And it's sort of a question, but also a challenge. I think Nick from Community Organizing. And I think he's asking perhaps a good place to end, which is how do you bring more of that humanity into national policy and politics without getting into a political conversation, obviously. But, you know, how is it that we can bring more of that humanity that we see in the communities at a more national level? And I think that's all that we're going to have time for today, sadly, but I'd love to hear your views on them.
Well, I mean, here we are in the midst of Purda, not able to comment on any political problem that there has been in the last 15 years. I think that in the end, we may now see that those who might not have shown an understanding of what the issues have been on the ground, where we've now more children in food poverty, more destitution. You know, this is, I think, the first time in my 50 years of life dancing about, giggling about how sometimes got it right, sometimes wrong. We've got a real challenge on our hands to rebuild and to take forward a future for our communities. And in the end, it is about trying to persuade the very best people to come into the political world and to stand up for what they believe in and to be brave enough to do those things. I hope everybody in the hustings tonight, I've got my daughter running the Progressive Alliance in the Isle of Wight. I hope that we will be saying, okay, so when you get to Westminster, what will you commit for the island? You know, what do you think we need to do? You've got to hold, that's what democracy is about, in my experience, is holding those in positions of power, whether they be school girls, whether they be MPs, or whether they be the amazing Lynn Williams, who's the leader of the Blackpool Council, to say, okay, why have you done what you've done? And how do we explain this? And why did you take that decision? And how can we make this better? And that is, in the end, about local democracy.
I live with the local democracy issues of an MP that might lose their seat, and I would want to see and hope that whoever is elected for the constituency where I live, quite apart from the politics of supporting Sunderland or anything else, actually has that understanding of humanity and that greater depth. I think sometimes these are just about political cycles, but I think that the challenge in recognising the need of community at a time when we know that on the back of COVID, the impact that it had on the community at large, cost of living crisis, across the country, hasn't gone away. That hasn't disappeared. Interest rates might come down, but the fact is you're still paying a huge, having to make difficult choices. And there is, and that's not a political sort of point. It's the fact that you would hope that those who are elected to represent communities do so for the right reasons. And it's difficult to say any more than that, particularly at this point in time.
But to cheer ourselves up, 7 million volunteers came out as part of that great weekend a few weekends ago. If you look at the numbers that came out for COVID, absolutely incredible what the power is when people are galvanised, basically to help humanity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how come we don't manage to make that happen when we see a child being pushed on the bus? So that, it's for all of us, really. And what a great list of people on the webinar.
With that, I think we're going to have to very sadly bring this great conversation to a close. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to both of you for preparing for the conversation, for sharing so honestly things that went very well, things that didn't go so well, and all the learnings that you had. And what an exciting time we're living in now in terms of looking ahead and all the changes that are possible. So really wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. And we will certainly look forward to seeing you join other events in the future and being part of this great movement.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.